What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated armies from the last week of competitive 40k play, and this is going to be an exciting one because we have our first full weekend of results using all of the new updates from this past December, using new detachments from the Grotsmas content drop, as well as the new updated December data slate and FAQ. Now, I was live all weekend streaming the Everwinter GT, one of the larger events of the weekend, and I do think I picked up a little bit of a sore throat there, so I do apologize ahead of time for that. But in any case, we have a bunch of events to talk about and a bunch of new lists and archetypes to discuss, so let's dive in. First off, with the Metagame Breakdown. A lot of this is not going to be too surprising for folks who are paying attention to the new Grotsmas detachments. I recently released a tier list of those Grotsmas detachments, and we see a lot of the ones at the top of that list doing fairly well. This includes Adeptus Custodes, who took down Glass City, as well as DEF CON 2025, two events with undefeated results using the new Solar Spearhead detachment, Necrons taking down the Hammer in the New Year, as well as LVO Can't Go with their new Starshatter Arsenal detachment, and Astra Militarum at Everwinter that I streamed, as well as the Frost Spite GT, both of those with the new Bridgehead strike detachment. We did see some classic stuff come out of the woodwork, though, in the form of Space Marines. Dark Angels took down two events at Glass City, as well as ProCon Golden Ticket, and we also saw both Ultramarines and Deathwatch do well. Ultramarines also at the Glass City GT, and Deathwatch at the Saffron Slam, that using Black Spear Task Force, their new detachment. In addition, we also saw some other factions doing fairly well. Thousand Suns took down the Ironbound 5 event, Tyranids also went undefeated at Everwinter, and Tau Empire took down the PNW Warlord LVO Prep. Now, if you're looking to watch any of the content from this week, both myself and our friends over at Tabletop Live were live this weekend with two of the larger events of the weekend. Obviously, I streamed the Everwinter GT. If you go to the live tab on my channel, you can go find all of the VODs of those games over there. And Tabletop Live streamed the other large GT Plus level event in North America, the Glass City GT. As always with these videos, I also want to throw out a shout out to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise and helps me make this content. You can support the channel by supporting me with a YouTube channel membership, or by going over to my Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, or supporting me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV. Big thanks to everyone who does that, and let's dive into the lists, starting with Adeptus Custodes. So we're going to start with one of the larger events of the weekend, the Glass City GT, which was really on the cusp of a major level event, selling 100 tickets and I think getting somewhere around 90 final players. The event was being held in Toledo, Ohio, and saw a bunch of really powerful factions undefeated, as well as two separate varieties of Space Marines, who we'll talk about later. But what I think we're most excited to discuss is the current Warhammer World Champion Folger Piles and his Adeptus Custodes. Folger was playing the new Solar Spearhead detachment. This is the bike and dreadnought focus detachment that gives huge mobility improvements to those styles of unit, including speeding up your dreadnoughts with movement characteristic increases, additional bonuses to advance and charge, the ability to advance and charge with them, and even move them and their mounted units through walls. Folger was running a single blade champion with the Adamantine Talisman as a standard character, although we also saw 3 Telemon heavy dreadnoughts. Now, the special thing about this detachment is that up to 2 dreadnoughts in the army can be included as characters as well. So we are also getting the opportunity to attach enhancements and other bonuses to these enormous heavy Redemptor chassis tanks. This included 1 Telemon heavy dreadnought with the Augury uplink enhancement to give it a 5+ feel no pain, which then combines with its already inbuilt -1 damage and makes this thing ridiculously hard to kill. That Adamantine Talisman is also found on the Blade Champion. That improves the attack, strength, and damage characteristics of its melee weapons by 1, especially good if it's swinging its 3 damage devastating profile. From there, we had a bunch of infantry to follow up that Blade Champion, including a Custodian Warden unit for him to join into, as well as 2 units of prosecutors for utility. The rest of the list was built entirely out of vehicles, which get the detachment abilities. This included the 3 Telemon dreadnoughts, as I mentioned before, some backline shooting provided by 2 sets of Gladius grav tanks, and 3 venerable Contemptor dreadnoughts. Now, the Venerable Contemptors are the real standout from this detachment. They have the ability to reanimate themselves on a 2+ when destroyed, making it so that armies that can't deal with them in a single phase have a really tough time doing it, although multi-phase armies are able to take them down fairly effectively. The Gladius grav tanks with Arachnid's heavy blaze cannons get a lot of additional efficiency from the fact that they get reroll ones to hit once they start taking damage, so if they're caught in a shooting match with other heavy vehicles, they're actually a little bit more efficient than you'd expect. Even at the top end of the bracket, when they are undamaged, they get an OC bonus, making those Gladius grav tanks able to play a little bit more aggressively, steal objectives from your opponent in situations where they might not have been expecting it. The speed and resilience of these dreadnoughts, backed up by that ever-present incredible shooting from the Gladius grav tanks, really make Solar Spearhead incredibly good, and we saw some pretty good results from it this weekend, including lists focusing more on the newly improved Virtus Praetors, although obviously Folger wasn't playing those in his list this time around, preferring to focus on those Telemons instead. Now, we'll return to the Glass City GT later on for some other lists, but first, let's move over to Hammer in the New Year, a 48-player GT held in Virginia. This one was won by Jonas Beardsley running Necrons. Jonas was playing the brand new Necron Starshatter Arsenal, and I don't think anybody can be too surprised that we are seeing Starshatter Arsenal get some success. This detachment has a ton going for it, including impressive mobility, as well as huge defensive stats, and some pretty solid offensive buffs applied especially to its vehicles, but a lot of those buffs can be applied faction-wide as well. This list was including 2 Hexmark destroyers, one with Demanding Leader to allow a unit to fall back and shoot nearby him, and one with Chrono Impedance Fields to give a unit -1 damage. The Hexmark destroyers, being lone operatives, are pretty solid places to hide these guys, although once the battle is joined, they can go down fairly quickly, so you do have to play pretty cagey to keep them alive and keep their buffs in play for as long as possible. They were supporting the Silent King. He's an incredible piece in this list. It improves his threat range, makes him very tough to take down, especially once that -1 damage from the Chrono Impedance Field is active on him, and allows him to play really aggressively to get his big 6 damage cannons on target in the early game, whereas oftentimes you have to play him a little bit defensively to make sure that you can use his buffs as the game goes on. In Starshatter Arsenal, he can play the frontline mid-board role that he always has wanted to. We then also have a Canoptek Reanimator, so we can tank a lot of damage and then regenerate a lot of it with that bonus reanimation from the Reanimator's aura. We have a Canoptek Spider to provide a 6+ Feel No Pain to our vehicles, 3 Doomsday Arcs to follow the Silent King around, benefit from his auras, and offer some enormously powerful long-range shooting that can then be buffed by all these survivability improvements, as well as a bunch of utility, including 2 individual Locust Destroyers and a unit of Flayed Ones for forward operation, plus a little bit of MSU to support the big guns, including 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers with Exterminators to give them a little bit of infantry sweeping. That is classically one of the downsides of the style of Necron army, and especially the Starshatter Arsenal. The enormous cannons on these huge vehicles are very good at punching through other armor, but you do run into some problems, as we actually saw on stream this weekend, against huge hordes, and the Enmitic Exterminators give you a little bit of an out for matchups like that. We also then saw 2 units of Scorpec Destroyers for some melee counterpunch, 1 unit of Tomb Blades. These guys are getting Assault innately built in from the detachment, and the detachment has a lot of synergy with mounted units already, making them an excellent utility unit for this army, and a Triarch Stalker to strip cover from enemies to set them up for the big shooting. Now, Starshatter Arsenal definitely has a lot of optimization to go through. There are some builds that are focusing a little bit more heavily on infantry, especially things like Lich Guard, and we also see characters like Imhotep the Stormlord get slotted into the list in order to power its incredible of stratagems. This all gives Starshatter Arsenal an impressive amount of survivability, tons of mobility, and a very good offensive punch. It basically is a huge stat check of a detachment, and we're seeing it do pretty well. Now, with that, at the Glass City GT event, we also saw Dark Angels and both Ultramarines do fairly well this week. However, what we're going to do is actually move over to the Pro-Con Golden Ticket event. This was held in Ontario, Oregon. This list was won by Sean Sharp, who was running Dark Angels, and a pretty interesting variety of Dark Angels, choosing to take both Azrael and Lionel Johnson. Now, this is a Gladius task force, and we are seeing a little bit of a resurgence of Gladius task force, not only in Dark Angels, but in other sub-factions within Space Marines as well, to make use of their newly improved datasheets with the added flexibility that Gladius task force gives you. Especially getting the ability to advance and charge, for example, with Lionel Johnson is a huge buff to this guy, and I think it would be a tough sell to take this aggressive melee-only Primarch without the ability to improve his threat range significantly. Now we're running Asriel as well as Lionel Johnson, a unit of 5 intercessors as well as a unit of inner circle companions for Asriel to join into and buff with his invulnerable save. We then have a unit of 5 scouts for utility, 1 invader ATV, which at its current points value of 60 points is an incredible inclusion, especially since the fact that these guys have 8 toughness 5 wounds, so they're not even that easy to kill once they are on target and scoring you secondary points. And then from there, we are running a bunch of really tough offensive profiles. 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, as well as 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Those Redemptors running Onslaught Gatling Cannons and Macroplasma Incinerators. Those are being protected by a Ravenwing Darkshroud as well to further improve that survivability. And we're also running a Vindicator in the back line to really cement that front line of 2+ save tanks. Now we're going to see a little bit of a through line here as we move on to some other Space Marine chapters, but these 2+ save vehicles are extremely difficult in Space Marines to take out, and being able to put down 7 or even 8 vehicles that you can compound between their strong defensive characteristics originally, but also with defensive stratagems and other defensive effects like this Dark Shroud to make that army incredibly tough to kill. It's interesting that we're playing Gladius Task Force in this particular build, although that makes sense because it has a lot of really good buffs for units like the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. And even if you're not playing it in Dark Angels, there are a lot of factions that love to use these styles of units. Playing them in compliant chapters allows you to get +1 to wound on all of those Macroplasma Cannons, which is a huge buff to those guys. In this case, Lionel Johnson is a pretty good inclusion alongside the Dreadnoughts, since he's very good at defending them from aggressive enemies that are going to come in and engage them. Especially given the fact that the Macroplasmas on the Redemptors are blast weapons and they can't be fired into melee, and the Redemptors don't have that many base melee attacks. One way to deal with them is simply inundate them with a bunch of bodies and prevent them from being able to shoot those guns effectively. You can beat on them for a while. They're going to take ages to actually kill themselves out of melee. However, Lionel Johnson just standing there with that now newly improved 2 damage sweep definitely makes that a much tougher pill to swallow and a tougher fortress to engage into. We also can't forget about Asriel and those 6 inner circle companions, as well as even just the 5 intercessors back here. Those guys being able to fire 20 bolt rifle shots in addition to their grenades and other shooting that might have actually poses a pretty big threat. So you can never count those guys out either. Now moving on from there, let's talk about the Frost Spike GT from Phoenix, Arizona. This was run by Ben Urich playing Astra Militarum, and this was one of the few 6-round events of the weekend. Almost all the other events this weekend were only 5 games. Astra Militarum saw a ton of success with their new Bridgehead strike detachment, which it seems like is coming out after the Grotsmas drops as being one of the best detachments in the game, and a huge improvement for Astra Militarum, a faction that was already doing pretty well with archetypes that work very well with Bridgehead Strike. We also saw Bridgehead Strike do well at the Everwinter GT that I streamed. I unfortunately didn't get them on stream, but we did also see Militarum at 5-0 at that event. Ben Urich's list was running 3 Militarum Tempestus command squads. One of them has a Shroud Projector, the other one the Bombast class Vox Array, to split his orders out to additional units after he issues them. We then have 2 tank commanders, these equipped with Demolisher battle cannons, multi-meltas, and las cannons. That adds a little bit of more traditional anti-tank shooting and kind of a hard armored center for the army. The army tends to focus on light infantry and mechanized infantry that's easy for a lot of armies to kill, so getting yourself a couple of tank commanders that are relatively self-sufficient and can act as your late game anchors is very important after your infantry start dropping on the table and dying. We also have Ursula Creed in here, who's able to discount stratagems, which is going to be huge for Bridgehead Strike, given how important its stratagems are going to be to it. We have a Cadian Shock Trooper squad that Ursula Creed can jump into, as well as 2 units of Catachan Jungle Fighters, and 4 units of 10 Tempestus Scions, those equipped with Melta-Guns and Plasma Guns. We have a bunch of Toroxes to embark those units into. You do get that +1 to wound bonus from the detachment ability when those units disembark transports or jump in from reserve. So being able to jump some of these guys into the Toroxes is an easy way to get additional threat range in the early game and also benefit from that wound bonus. And the Torox Prime obviously comes with fire support, so you're able to do immense damage with wound rerolls once you've dropped out of that thing. We have a unit of Attilan Rough Riders to give the army a little bit of melee counterpunch, as well as some utility from Tempestus Aquilons, 2 units of 10 of them, to allow you to 6-inch deep strike, potentially get the +1 wound bonus on the Sentry Flamer in these units, but then they can also act as either efficient infantry sweepers or also just utility units to perform actions or complete maneuver secondaries. Not too surprising to see Bridgehead Strike doing incredibly well here. The army's going to throw enormous numbers of really high efficiency Tempestus Scion units right at your opponent and give them enormous offensive buffs to be able to really crush through once they are down on the table. You're also then flooding the table with highly maneuverable bodies that can sweep in and outscore the opponent as they're also outkilling them. Now we're going to return over to Glass City GT to talk about our next Space Marine faction, Ultramarines. Conan Jennings took Ultramarines to an undefeated result at Glass City, running this time an Ironstorm Spearhead. Now, I'm honestly surprised that we haven't seen more armies like this one coming out of the woodwork and doing well since Ultramarines buff in this latest December data slate, getting +1 to wound within the compliant chapters, in addition to the enormous amount of reliability that we get from being able to Oath of Moment twice with Robute Gilliman, and also get floating rerolls from Ironstorm Spearhead, and present that really tough defensive profile, that 2+ save profile that we just discussed when talking about the Dark Angels list, makes this Ironstorm Spearhead an absolutely terrifying prospect, at least in terms of simply its ability to stat check out other armies. It's not very flexible, it's not very maneuverable, but it will just kill a lot of armies stone dead. This includes a lieutenant with combi weapon with Master of Machine War to allow a vehicle to advance or fall back and still shoot, Marneus Calgar, and Robute Gilliman. A big benefit here is that we have a lot of CP and free stratagems to use now that Robute Gilliman can choose 2 targets for his Primarch abilities, so he can be broadcasting his aura of free stratagems or discounted stratagems, as well as provide 2 Oath of Moment targets to the army. That allows you to potentially be dropping both Armor of Contempt and Smokescreen, as well as reactive shots from the Ironstorm Spearhead stratagems, effectively every single turn, and makes this army extremely difficult to kill. We have an Intercessor squad as well to lock the backline objective and provide some infantry sweeping, 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, a Company Heroes unit for Marneus Calgar to join into, 1 Incursor squad to add a little bit of an additional accuracy buff, a Scout squad for utility, a Stormspeeder Hammerstrike to strip cover from enemies. I think these guys are going to be seen in a lot of detachments, especially ones that don't have stratagems like Storm of Fire that they can ignore cover with innately. The Stormspeeder Hammerstrike is not only a good piece by itself with some solid damage output, but also can remove cover from an additional enemy target, and that makes the units like these Vindicators and Ballistus Dreadnoughts that much more lethal. Speaking of Vindicators, we also have 3 of those in the list as well. This is a very similar style to the Gladius task force that we just discussed. This time we're running it in Ironstorm Spearhead, so we're hyper accurate. We have a little bit of melee counterpunch in the late game from Marneus Calgar and Robute Gilliman, a little bit less flexibility, losing out on Gladius Task Force, but more damage output, as well as more stratagem usage, thanks to the combination of Calgar and Gilliman there. And with that, we're going to move over to the Saffron Slam 10, held over in Great Britain. This is a relatively smaller GT, only 28 players, but we did see it taken down by none other than Jack Tight running Deathwatch. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a really long time, you actually might recognize Jack from back in T5S2, I think Season 2, where we streamed a lot of his games using old varieties of Space Marines, using the 8th edition mechanics. However, today he's coming out of the gate swinging with a Black Spear Task Force with this newly updated Deathwatch index. Now, I've been playing this index at the behest of my chat over on Twitch. You can go follow me over there at twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV. But this detachment is absolutely insane and has a bunch of super cool buffs for the newly improved kill team units. Now, the army included a jump pack Captain with Tome of the Ectoclades. So once per game, we're going to be able to choose a second Oath of Moment target, and both of them get simultaneously active for that one turn. The important thing about the captains in this list is that Deathwatch have a ton of really powerful stratagems, but very few ways to get additional command points. And the captains being able to start inside their kill teams and give you free usage of things like Teleportarium to redeploy your units around, or also for uses of your special issue ammunition, is a very big improvement for these armies, even if the captain himself doesn't do that much damage. We then also see a Judiciary with a Thief of Secrets to improve his AP and damage characteristics, but then also get an additional buff if he kills enemy models, as well as a Watchmaster with the Beacon Angelus. We then have a unit of 10 Deathwatch veterans for that Watchmaster to hop into, give his unit advance and charge and some use of free stratagems. We have an Intercessor squad to lock in the backline objective. That's basically crucial in these Deathwatch armies, since oftentimes they are going to be teleporting off of their backline objectives. You really need to be able to lock that in and screening out and defend it from enemy utility units as the game goes on. So I think these Intercessors are kind of required. We have an Incursor squad to improve the accuracy of these big kill teams, as well as 2 Indomitor kill teams, both of them equipped with a pair of Heavy Bolters, a trio of Eradicators, as well as a trio of Boltstorm Gauntlet Aggressors inside the units. Now, the Indomitor kill teams gain additional strength bonuses on their attacks if they either charge or target the closest enemy unit. That makes the big, heavy, multi-damage bolt rifles in the unit incredibly high strength. Again, pump up to somewhere around strength 7. And that also improves the lighter anti-infantry shooting from the grenade launchers as well. We then have a Sternguard veteran squad, just 5 Sternguard veterans in there to pile some mortal wounds onto an enemy oath target, and 2 big Talon Strike kill teams. One of these is likely going to start on the table to benefit from the Jump Pack Captain's Rights of Battle, so we can teleport that unit around for free, potentially. Each Talon Strike kill team is composed of 5 Jump Pack Intercessors, as well as 5 Heavy Intercessors or Inceptors. In this case, we're running all 10 of those Inceptors with Plasma Exterminators. These guys get an additional EP bonus when they drop in from the sky, with the ability to then further improve that with special issue ammunition to potentially get ignore cover or even further AP bonuses or extend their range, and that makes them incredibly dangerous against high save characteristic targets. This makes Deathwatch really lethal against other Space Marine chapters, for example, because you can punch through defensive stratagems like Armor of Contempt and even Smokescreen by simply overloading your opponent's save characteristic. They can still be a pretty strong save, but it doesn't matter so much if you're coming at them with AP4 or AP5 across the board. Super cool to see Deathwatch doing well, and these big, huge Gravis Armored kill teams are definitely a unique way to play Space Marines. So if you really want to see the big, chunky, heavy infantry on the table, Deathwatch, I think, are the way to do it. Now with that, let's move over to Sweden and talk about the Ironbound 5 event. This was a 32-player GT and was taken down by Matthias Lindvall Ostling running Thousand Suns. Thousand Suns have flown under the radar for a little bit here. They keep continuously putting up some event results, but they've remained relatively static since their last couple of updates, and I think we're mostly seeing the same thing happen in this case. This is a Cult of Magic detachment that Matthias is playing, so we're not going to see the new Hexwarp Thrall band come out to play anytime soon, probably because I don't think it works very well. But the army includes Magnus the Red, 2 Exalted Disc Sorcerers, 3 Infernal Masters, 1 with the Umbralific Crystal, 1 with the Arcane Vortex to improve his damage, as well as a standard Demon Prince with Lord of Forbidden Lore, so he can duplicate Kabbalistic rituals and provides a stealth aura within 6 inches of himself. We're then seeing 3 units of 5 Rubric Marines, likely to attach the Infernal Masters into to give their really powerful Torrent attack rerolls, as well as 2 units of Thousand Suns Cultists and 2 units of Chaos Spawn to act as utility, and a Mutalith Vortex Beast as well. The combination of the Mutalith Vortex Beast and the Demon Prince gives you a pretty solid early push, especially given the fact that the Demon Prince can make not only the Mutalith, but also Magnus the Red a little bit harder to kill, and really change a lot of the combat math. From there, you have a ton of little characters and small utility units that can run around the table using Kabbalistic rituals, and potentially score yourself some points so that you can late game using Magnus. This is a classic variety of Thousand Suns, so we're basically seeing the same stuff do well. Where we are seeing a lot of innovation, however, is with Tyranids. I streamed the Everwinter GT over the course of the weekend. This ended up being a 70-player GT held in Boston, Massachusetts. So you can go check that out on the live tab of my channel. It was won by Astra Militarum, who we've already discussed, but we also had the runner-up as Sam Pope playing Tyranids. Now, Sam was playing the brand new updated Assimilation Swarm detachment. Assimilation Swarm has been around for a really long time and occasionally sees a little bit of success, but very recently it got some huge buffs, including easier regeneration from its harvester units and a greater volume of regenerated wounds. This whole detachment is about tanking damage and then using your harvesters to reanimate your models, potentially multiple times per turn, stacking those wounds way back up to the top. A very Necron style of play. Now, Sam Pope has been playing a very similar variety of Tyranids for the last couple of months. This includes a Turvagon, as well as a huge boat of Termagant that the Turvagon can heal, and Sam can use to deny enemy primary objective points. It's an incredibly consistent game plan. Essentially, any enemy that isn't capable of one-shotting a Termagant unit, which, to be fair, is most enemies in 40k, is then going to allow those Termagants to respawn back onto the objectives and give Sam a bunch of points. It's very consistent at scoring, and it's very difficult to stop if you're not built specifically for it. Even if you are, you oftentimes have to expose so much of your army to attack the Termagants that then the Tyranid shooting can come into play and start to defeat you in the late game. So, we have a Turvagon with Biophasic Flow to improve the range at which Harvester units can heal nearby friendlies, and we have a Winged Hive Tyrant with Instinctive Defense, which gives him a situational free heroic intervention, as well as fights first when he's standing near Harvester units. Now, it is important to note this is a Winged Hive Tyrant, so he is faster, but he doesn't have the ability to buff the speed of guns. From there, we have 4 units of 20 Termagants, all of those equipped with Spine Fists and Strangle Webs, alongside a Hormagaunt unit to add one small fast unit that we can use to flip an objective once per game. We then have a Biovore for some scoring and generating Spore Mines. Importantly, as long as you don't need to generate the Spore Mines to score in this detachment, you can just generate them and use them to kill themselves by running in and detonating on enemy units to then heal using the stratagem inside Assimilation Swarm. We have 3 Exocrines for backline shooting there as well, alongside 2 Psychophages, which are probably the #1 harvester outlet in this detachment. They're monsters that are relatively hard to kill for their points cost and will constantly heal unless you deal with them, but most of the anti-tank would much rather be shooting at the hyper-efficient Exocrines or the Norn Assimilator that's also here, but you kind of have to attack the Psychophages to turn off the regeneration combos. We then have a Pyrovore, which is an ignore cover outlet for the Exocrines, but is also in a pinch another harvester unit. A Ripper Swarm to act as a harvester unit as well, 1 unit of 3 Venom Thropes to buff the Gaunts with cover and stealth to make those units harder to one-shot, and last but certainly not least, the Norn Assimilator. Now, the Assimilator is another improvement from the recent update. This thing recently was given the Harvester keyword, so it works with all of the synergies inside this detachment. This allows it to heal itself or other units around it, and also allows you to use a Blade of Carapace as long as it's holding an objective to get a 4+ Feel No Pain. A 2+ armor save, while it lacks an invulnerable save, and that 4+ Feel No Pain often makes it really sticky to kill, and it's one of the highest damage output units in the Tyranid Codex, so it's able to actually slap back and clear some enemy tanks if they commit into it and actually don't remove it. So we have a huge frontline bulwark of that Norn Assimilator, a ton of little Termagants that it can use to bolster up its OC and steal objectives, and then backing that up with a bunch of shooting that's going to expose itself if you commit into that frontline, and if you ever don't kill any of the units in the frontline, they're going to use a bunch of stratagems and effects to heal back up almost to full. Sam did mention in his games, though, that he would rather be playing his Invasion Fleet version of the list, and that he was running the Assimilation Swarm through its paces, but it definitely lacks a little bit of damage output in comparison with more straightforward detachments like Invasion Fleet. Now with that, let's move over to Ellensburg, Washington for the PMW Warlords LVO Prep GT. This was another relatively small 28-player GT, and this one was taken down by Donald Plummer running Tau Empire. Donald was running the new auxiliary Cadre, the detachment that focuses on combining your Tau units with your auxiliary units, giving Tau units statistical improvements when they attack enemies nearby auxiliary units, or giving them bonuses when they are themselves nearby those auxiliaries. The detachment has a lot of incredibly powerful flexible stratagems. It can wildly improve the threat range of your auxiliary units, buff up their offensive stats, and make your Tau units super hard to pin down with things like fallback moves at the end of any fight phase, which also can be used to complete secondaries and flip objectives on your opponent when they might not be expecting them. Donald was running Commander Shadow Sun for her reroll aura. She also potentially gives you CP refunds when you use stratagems in an aura around her, and that is important for this detachment since it's probably one of the most command point starved detachments in the game, given that all of its stratagems are almost always online, almost all the time, at least in the early game. To support that as well, we also have an ethereal, as well as a commander in Cold Star battlesuit, and a fired team with admired leader. This allows you to improve the OC and leadership characteristics of your auxiliary units targeted in your command phrase from this guy, which can allow you to get huge OC benefits from fast Kroot Carnivore units, or even light and fast units like Vespid Stingwings or Kroot Hounds. Being a lone operative allows the Fire Psych team to play a little bit more fast and loose as well, so they can play kind of aggressively to get in range to apply that admired leader bonus and aren't necessarily in danger immediately. To get those buffs, we then have 2 units of 10 Kroot Carnivores. We then have, to support the army with guiding, a Pathfinder team, as well as 2 units of 3 stealth battlesuits. Following them up are 3 units of 5 Vespid Stingwings. These are guys that are not only good for scoring in this detachment, but they're also very fast, and so they can use those effects like improved speed and improved OC to steal objectives away from enemies and provide the AP buff to your Tau units when they shoot enemies near the Vespid Stingwings. They're good in a lot of different circumstances in this detachment. We have 2 units of 3 Krutox Rampagers. The detachment does have a stratagem that allows them to advance and charge, and you can potentially even auto-6 their advance roll, which makes the Krutox Rampagers much easier to get into melee with, a real downside of these mounted units that they had on their original release. We had a unit of 5 Kroot Hounds as well to add another fast outlet for those auxiliary buffs. 1 unit of 2 broadside battlesuits, these including heavy rail rifles, seeker missiles, and missile pods. 1 unit of fire knife battlesuits. These guys were going to join into a Cold Star commander that was rocking a cyclic ion blaster, high output burst cannon, and 2 missile pods. The AP buffs, as well as the potential strength buffs you can get from the detachment's ability and stratagems, are huge for these fire knife teams. These long-range missile pod units are able to get shots on target, clear out enemy utility units, and do so with incredible reliability thanks to the detachment synergies, but also from angles where you could potentially not get attacked on the crackback. We also then have a Ghost Kill battlesuit, as well as 2 Hammerhead gunships and a Skyray gunship. The Hammerhead gunships were running ion cannons, which is a relatively mid-AP weapon, which gets a lot of bonuses from the strength and AP buffs that this detachment can give it, so that's not a surprising inclusion as well. It's awesome to see Auxiliary Cadre getting some play, because I do think it may be one of the more slept on detachments out of the Grotsmas drop. Having played it on stream myself, I think this detachment has a lot of legs, and I'm interested to see how the Tau community builds for it. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.